Strategic bombing in World War II often brings up images of the flying fortresses the U.S. 8th Air Force committed to destroying the German war machine, enduring flak and 109 attacks as they trundled along to target up high in the cold blue. But before their arrival into the theater, shadows lurked in the night above German skies, striking in the dark and leaving burning factories and broken dams in its wake. Created out of the failure of the Avro Manchester, which was made alongside the Handley Page Halifax and Short Stirling on recommendation from Arthur Bomber Harris, the Avro Lancaster was a redesign of the Manchester centered around the use of more reliable Merlin engines, in place of the unreliable Vultures that were used before. The redesign period was relatively short, being only about a year and a half between the first flight of the Manchester in July of 1939 and the first flight of the Lancaster in early 1941. The principal designer for the new bomber was Roy Chadwick, who would later go on to design the following Lincoln, its derivative the Shackleton, and the early designs of the Vulcan V bomber. With a wingspan of 102 feet, length of 69 feet, and empty weight of 36,900 pounds, the Lancaster was large for a strategic bomber, but curiously enough the shortest of the three main four-engine bombers the RAF used, with both the Handley Page Halifax and ironically named Short Stirling being longer than the Lancaster at 71 feet and 87 feet length respectively. For defensive armament, Lancaster had three turrets, one in the nose, one in the rear, and one on the dorsal spine. There was originally a ventral dustbin turret, though it was quickly removed due to unfavorable aerodynamic effects and being cumbersome to use. With a maximum payload capacity of 7 tons of ordnance, only bested by the B-29 later in the war, the Lancaster housed its bombs in a long bomb bay that stretched from aft of the bombardier to forward of the dorsal turret. The Lancaster could carry both a large variety and quantity of ordnance that could be tailored to whatever target was being hit. For putting these bombs on target in the dead of night, the Lancaster was given an absolutely ludicrous amount of advanced avionics, many of which are the precursors to modern avionics we use today. The most famous of these was the H-2S ground radar set, which was not only the first dedicated ground scan radar, but also allowed the Lancaster to bomb in bad weather and would be the basis for American ground scan radars later on in the war. Another famous part of Lancaster's avionic package was GI and oboe, radio and radar navigation systems which allowed Lancaster to navigate in the dark without the need of stars or landmarks. The first public mission of the Lancaster would be in April of 1942, where they attacked an engine manufacturing plant in southern Germany at low altitude. This attack was conducted in daytime and was the first publicly reported raid done by Lancasters, revealing its existence to both the British public and Germany. Initial operations would have the Lancasters flying in daytime, though attrition from the German air defenses would soon have RAF Bomber Command switch to night operations for all missions to Germany, as a means to preserve their aircraft and pilots. Since targets were generally industrial, logistical, or otherwise a very big non-moving building of some variety, bombing at night was not seen as severe a hindrance as one would think, especially when aided by the H-2S radar set and advanced navigation systems. Outside of factories and train yards, however, there were the occasional specialty targets that were given dedicated operations, such as Operation Hydra, which focused on the production facilities for Germany's V-2 rocket program. Operation Chastise, the famous Dambusters raid led by Guy Gibson, which destroyed the dams Monet and Yder, and Operation Catechism, the sinking of the battleship Tirpitz by No. 617 Squadron using the Tallboy bomb. Speaking of the Tallboy bomb, it was but one of many odd and curious ordnances the Lancaster would carry in its vast service, courtesy of its enormous lifting capacity and large bomb bay. In fact, Lancaster was originally the aircraft chosen to carry the atomic weapons of the Manhattan Project before the B-29 was ready to go. Towards the end of the war, Lancaster would be developed into the Lincoln, which would not see service in World War II and instead serve RAF Bomber Command in the immediate post-war era. Lancaster itself, however, continued to serve in auxiliary and coastal patrol roles until 1967, when Canada finally retired them fully. 7,377 Lancasters were built, and of that number, 17 surviving examples remain around today on display in Europe and America. 2 of those 17 are airworthy, one being owned by the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight and the other operated by the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum. To say Lancaster was important in the war would be an understatement. Lancaster was the heart and soul of Britain's ability to retaliate against Germany, and was built in greater numbers than both the Halifax and Stirling. Though the B-17s get much of the fame for their daring incursions into Germany, Lancasters were just as important, if not more so, in the strategic bombing campaign of Germany's war machine. And it's somewhat sad to see the Lancaster, for as critical a role it played, and as beloved as it was at the time, to be overshadowed in modern history by the Flying Fortress.